Welcome to our first webinar this year, actually, and I'm really delighted to be presenting it on behalf of Wines of Germany, or the Good Wine Shop, and our collection of the wines, because these are wines that I love. And certainly in the shop, we come up time and again against the usual prejudices that all German wine is sweet, that it's lieb from Milch and isn't worth drinking, and that it's all white. So what we're focusing on tonight, and what you should have poured and ready to enjoy during the talk, is a white made from Grauburgunder, which is otherwise known as Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio elsewhere, and a red made from Spatburgunder, or Pinot Noir as we better know it. And both of them are really important in Germany. So I have my glasses poised so I can taste. As we go through the presentation, we're going to stop and actually taste the white and the red at a certain point, but please don't feel that you can't enjoy them until we get to that point, because I really don't want you to do that. Just make sure that by the time we get about sort of 1/3, 2/3 through, you've got a bit of white and a bit of red that we can talk about. And if you have questions about things, please put them in the chat. I'll check once I finish presenting, I'll check the chat for questions and get myself organized to hopefully answer. So off we go. First up with, a map. So this is the current state of wines of Germany, the most up-to-date map they have, very nice and clear. Just a little bit of geography and history, really. You can see all the countries that border Germany. You've got Czechoslovakia, Austria, Switzerland, France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Denmark up here, Poland off the map. And you can see basically it's a continental country. It's almost landlocked apart from its border with the North Sea up in the top here. And all of its wine regions, or not all, but most of them, are concentrated in the southwestern corner here, basically along the border with Belgium, Luxembourg, France, and to a lesser extent, Switzerland. And you can see too that while there are mountains around here, obviously you've got the Alps and the Dolomites over this side, here you've got the mighty Rhine River running all the way through with its tributaries off all around here, and this sort of major rift valley here. And it's really rivers rather than mountains and sea that influences German wine. So we are going to, so these are the different regions just by acreage. I don't want to dwell on this too much, but just to give you an idea of the most productive one, which is the Rheinhessen. Historically, this was the source of Liebfraumilch, and there was an awful lot of it at one point. But tonight, the two wines that we're tasting, the red comes from the Pfalz, the white comes from the Nahe. And you can see this, for me, the Nahe is like a tiny little jewel in Germany's crown. It's the most lovely region. I had the pleasure of visiting it once, in fact, went to Hexamer. It's a wonderful region. And the Pfalz, which is really just a continuation of Alsace in France, but it becomes German. So we're looking in particular at those, but we will also have a look at Franken and Baden and Württemberg, because they're really important for some fantastic reds, and in the case of Franken, the best Silvana in Germany. And we'll have a look at the Mosel, just in terms of the lie of the land and how that affects the wines that they make and the grapes that they grow. So this is just a quick summary of what we talked about: landlocked, almost, mountains around the south, rivers. And it really is rivers and the varied soils that drive the different styles, particularly in Baden and the Pfalz, because they're on a rift valley. Historically, I'm sure those of you who study geography, it didn't include me until I had to learn about wine, by the way, will know that the Rhine is a rift valley, two plates meet, various layers of soil are thrust towards the surface at different times with different movements. And it happens that on both the Alsace vineyard side on the east bank, the west bank, sorry, and Baden on the right bank, there's a mosaic of totally different soils there because of that activity. And its climate, it's mostly an inland climate, and certainly, obviously, you can see that the vineyards are down in the southwestern corner, so they're very far from any kind of sea influence. And we would describe Germany's climate as continental, but kind of cool continental. It's not as extreme, for example, as, say, the center of Spain, where you get, as we saw in this year, people skating down Madrid's Gran Via in the cold, and in the summer it's 40 degrees. It's not as extreme as that. It's cooler in the north of Germany, much warmer too in the southeast as opposed to the southwest. And summers are getting warmer. There's no doubt that climate change is having an impact here, but it's not all bad news. What has happened is that some vineyards in quite marginal areas are now viable in the sense of the grapes being able to ripen fully and produce dry but ripe and very expressive wines. And for me, the Nahe does this especially well. We're just going to have a look at the different rivers. I'm going to scroll back to the map because, having told myself I'd remember, I've forgotten something I wanted to point out before we do. Let's get back to the map. There. Now, if you look at the Rhine, which is this big river here, you can see the Mosel, and just look at that tortuous path. It's just a series of phenomenally steep S-bends, which give sort of little amphitheatres on every one where the vines are able to ripen in the sunshine. The Nahe has lots of little rivers in it, and then there is no other river in Germany that has this sort of tortuous series of bends. And look at it, it's just phenomenal. You can imagine what the sun's like here. The sun is moving around here during the day. So the vines on the slope, they're getting more sunlight, and not just that, they're getting the heat that builds up and radiates back into the vineyards at nighttime. So these are vineyards where you get phenomenal ripeness. And this is an aerial view of that bend, just showing the different strips of vineyards all around here. So it's a long, the Mosel is quite a long river. It rises in France, 150 miles long, and at its narrowest point, it really is like a gorge. It has 500 vineyard sites here. It's the densest number of individual vineyard sites. This is important because Germany has moved over the last 2 or 3 decades from rating its quality based on the amount of sugar in the juice of the grapes on picking to rating its quality on specific sites. It's moved to a much more Burgundian style, if you like, village, Premier Cru, Grand Cru equivalent, and we'll look at that later on. So vineyard sites are seriously important. In the Mosel, 30% of a slope is normal, if not more, but there is one particularly impressive vineyard, and this is the Bremer Calmont vineyard. You can see it's not the most perfect picture that we could find for this, but it does give you an idea. The only place I've ever seen vineyards this steep or steeper is in the middle of northwest Spain in Ribera. And this is a close-up of that vineyard. They're picking. I think they're roped. I hope they're roped, because you can see the road down here. It gives you some idea of the sheer steepness of it, the difficulty of working such a slope. And in the Rheinhessen, it's a big region, but the vineyards generally are not quite so impressively steep. They're lower, gentle slopes. It's known as the land of 1,000 rivers, and it has 150 growing villages. So it doesn't have quite the clout of the Mosel. Sadly, it was most famous for being the home of a wine that everybody assumed was Riesling, but wasn't, and that was Liebfraumilch. And these days, plantings of Müller-Thurgau, which is a grape that makes Liebfraumilch, are in decline. They have been for the last 20 years. And in its place, they're planting more Riesling, more Grauburgunder, which hopefully you're drinking, and Silvana. So these are just much better quality grapes for the future. So we couldn't really do Germany without looking at Blue Nun. I mean, I know I'm giving my age away, but I do remember at 13 helping my mum, who ran the restaurant in the village pub, serve wine, obviously strictly illegal. I wasn't drinking it, but I do remember serving Blue Nun and Piers Porter and Niersteiner and Matches Rosé. This is a 1970s advert for Blue Nun. By then I was at university. And it was marketed as, I never realized this, but it was marketed as something that was sort of easy. It was consistent. You knew what you were getting. So in a way, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc's a bit like that. You can understand why pubs always have it by the glass, because there is an assumption that if it's a New Zealand Sauvignon, you know what you're going to get. It didn't do a lot for Germany's reputation for wine, sadly. The grape that produced it was not Riesling, it's Müller-Thurgau. These days, it's often referred to as Riesling, and it may be that people are trying to distance themselves, perhaps, from Müller-Thurgau and Blue Nun. You could hardly blame them. It's a really productive grape. And it was loved by growers for 3 reasons. It gave loads, yields were really high, it could ripen anywhere, and it made Liefremilch. And at a certain point in Germany's history, there was a ready market for Liefremilch in the world. But, like most things, if you keep the yields down, if you get some concentration, if you pick the grapes at full ripeness, and you vinify carefully, you can make a really lovely example. So you will find in the shop at the moment, Carl Joner's Rievener. I think it's about 11 or 12 pounds. It's modestly priced and it's lovely. So if you fancy trying a sort of new midweek white, go for it. It's a really nice wine. So we'll come now to look at the Nahe. So it's a very, very tiny region. It's sort of squeezed in between Rheinhessen and Rheingau, and it's more of a round region in the sense it's not just a long protracted valley. The river Nahe is a tributary of the Rhine, and it runs from the sort of parallel to the Mosel, and it joins the Rhine at Bingen, and it has lots of little tributaries. It's also quite forested, so when you're there, it feels you feel sort of more surrounded by the scenery. It's kind of towers over you in parts, and some of the plots are really quite tiny and difficult to work and access. There are 2 wonderful older growers who are there and a group of younger growers. I visited about 7 years ago, and at that time there was a group called the 9 of the Nahe, and Hexamer, whose Grauburgunder we are tasting tonight, was one of them, and I had a really good visit with them. And I know Richard, who's my colleague at work, has also visited him. So here he is, and what he's leaning on is a sort of classic German style barrel. These are quite big barrels. They're used for maturing wine, not to give any kind of obvious oaky character, but to allow the wine to just develop, mature very gently with a very, very modest degree of oxygenation as it does. And it just allows the wines to kind of flesh out a bit, develop a bit of texture and weight. Okay, so here's our first wine. So I've got some in my glass here. And I wonder, this is the same grape as Pinot Grigio or Pinot Gris in parts of New Zealand, in Alsace and other bits of France. And so much of what we buy or see in terms of Pinot Grigio is barely, has barely any colour, is often quite neutral on the nose. I often, when teaching, refer to it as theatre bar wine. You have a glass, you pre-order this glass of wine that you want when you can get to the theatre. You get there in the interval, the glass is already warm and it's pretty dull, and by the time you get back to your seat, because by the time you've got your glass, the bell has gone, you can't remember what you've drunk. And all too much Pinot Grigio and Pinot Gris is like that. I do find generally that Grauburgunder in Germany is better. It's just that people don't expect it. So let's have a sip of this. I made the mistake of chilling it earlier on too much and muting some of its lovely sort of exotic smells. I have to say, when we were tasting the wines for this month, the new wines, this one really stood out. We weren't tasting Rieslings at the time, we were tasting non-Riesling wines, and this one really stood out for its concentration, its richness, its freshness, its spiciness, its lovely sort of unctuous texture. It's 13.5% or 13 maybe. So I think for me, it's probably better compared with Alsace possibly than with either New Zealand or Italy. But I'm not going to ask you to contribute your thoughts right now, but please put them in a chat because I'm interested to know how it's going to sit with you. I think it's delicious, and yeah, it's very typical of Hexamer. He has a very rigorous approach to winemaking. He starts with low yields. So if you prune your vines hard, they give you less fruit, but the fruit has more concentration. So obviously your raw material is just better. He also picks quite late. So you're going for full ripeness. And in the Nahe, you can do that. And he only picks by hand to preserve the integrity of the grapes. He whole bunch pressing, which is the most gentle way to press. And he ferments at a cool temperature, but not, say, as cool as a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc would be, in stainless steel to retain fruit purity, but only ever with natural yeasts. So he doesn't add a yeast that gives a particular taste or gets the fermentation done in any given period of time. He just works with the natural yeast. And the vines here are on red volcanic soil, porphyr, like porphyry marble. And it's quite obviously it's a very mineral soil. It's quite a stress on the vines in terms of growing. And I think you do feel the concentration of it in this wine. And I love the fact that it doesn't really matter what you drink from him. Everything is just very kind of concentrated, beautifully knit together, perfect expression of whatever the grape is, and this lovely kind of mineral thing. I mean, particularly with the Grauburgunder, I get a lovely spiciness, which you tend not to get so much in Italy. You get it where things are really, really ripe. So I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. So just a little bit about Grauburgunder. You can see, and Grau means, if you speak German, I don't, you'll know that Grau means grey, and you can see how dark the skins are. So when the grapes are completely ripe, they're really dark. If you press too hard, you will get a sort of almost coppery colour from them. And there is a special type of Pinot Grigio in north of Italy called Pinot Grigio Amato where that is made. But it is a mutation. It's part of the Pinot family. It's a mutation of Pinot Noir. It has softer acidity than Pinot Noir and a much more generous kind of succulent texture, particularly in Alsace and in Germany. And flavours, if it's not quite so concentrated as this example, flavours can be lighter. You can get sort of pear and a little bit of peach. But here, where it's late picked, fully ripe, you do get something almost exotic and much spicier. And equally too, alcohol can go up to sort of 13.5 or even 14%, as it does in Alsace in warm places. So some pictures now of the Nahe. I'm one of the Nahe's probably the most famous winemaker. This is Dornhof. It's quite a young region. It doesn't have the history of, say, the Rheingau or the Rheinhessen or the Mosel. And it was only recognized in German wine law 90 years ago. Because the vineyards are quite scattered, some of them are on very, very steep slopes. It's not really suited to big commercial production in the way that the sort of sweeping vineyards of the Rheinhessen are. And it's a warmer region that tends to produce a bit weightier, sort of more concentrated styles that are dry. There's a lot of this red sandstone soil. The two great sort of old school makers are Dornhof and Schäfer-Fröhlich, both of which we have in the shop. And the famous site is the Rottenfels cliff, and you'll see this is it. When I visited, we had a walk across the top of this and just sort of peered down into the valley. It's pretty impressive stuff. And so we come to Riesling, because Hexamer makes great Riesling, Schäfer-Fröhlich make exceptional Riesling, so do Dornhof. So this is a nice moment to give a little time to Germany's best variety, in my view. It's certainly king of the white grapes. I'm sure you've drunk Riesling. If you've drunk Riesling, you'll know that it's fresh. It's naturally really high in acidity, but it's often very light in body and often quite moderate in alcohol. And yet there is this intensity of flavours. It ages so well. But yes, it does get quite mineral, and it really does reflect slate in particular. I think if I remember right, Hesiod wrote about the ability of grapes to reflect character on certain soils, and he linked wine with slate developing a character even then. But that's Riesling's particular hallmark. And in terms of flavors, you do get citrus, and if you were looking at, I don't know, Grosset's Polish Hill Riesling from Australia, from Clare Valley, you'd get searing lime, really lean and super minerality. In Germany, you can get lime, lemon, sort of orange. Almost in the sweet wines, you get something almost akin to marmalade, where there's botrytis. And you always have some profile of mineral notes, whether it's from the soil, or whether it's a kind of, I always like to think that with Riesling, you get some form of hydrocarbon. You might call it kerosene or petrol or paraffin, but some form of hydrocarbon is likely to be there to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the site and the maker. So the Rheingau is a sort of pretty region, really. It's historic. It's really important. This is Schloss Johannesburg, and this is where, really by chance, they stumbled upon the idea sweet wines because they picked very late. But this region is also really important now to Germany because it's where the Giesenheim Institute is. And the Giesenheim is not, I mean, it's not just a German institution, it's a world-class institution devoted to enology and viticulture and the production of grape varieties. There are so many crossings and new hybrid grape varieties that come out of this institute. It really is very, very important. Here in the Rheingau, most production is dry Riesling and Spatburgunder, which we know as Pinot Noir. And this is, as I say, this is Schloss Johannisberger and the sweet wines. And the role of the church here is quite important. It is in large parts of Europe. I mean, there's definitely a Master of Wine treatise on the contribution of the church in the Middle Ages to viticulture in the world, and it would be a long one. Here you've got the Cistercian monks at Kloster Eberbach, and also at the Benedictine monks at Schloss Johannisberg. And in 1775, the monks at Schloss Johannisberg picked late by mistake, and they discovered the botrytis affected wines. So the noble rot had attacked the grape varieties. They were shriveled and very unsightly, but when pressed, produced this extraordinary nectar, which is a botrytis affected wine. And here again, you can see that the Rheingau is much less hilly. It's the valleys are much wider, broader, and the vineyards far more gently laid. Up in the northwestern corner, you've got the tiny region of the Ahr. It's only 15 miles long. So this seems, I mean, a lot of attention perhaps for such a tiny valley, but it's really, really important for Pinot Noir in Germany. This is its speciality. And again, you can see these quite steep slopes. There are Roman remains here that testify to viticulture happening in 770 BC. And historically, until relatively recently, most of the Pinot produced here was very light and quite gentle and not particularly concentrated. And then in the early 1980s, some more serious growers started planting Burgundy clones of Pinot Noir, and they started aging their wines in barrel. And really since then, the Ahr has been on the up and up as the source of Germany's finest Pinot Noirs. So now we can have a look at Spatburgunder. And I have the Messmer Spatburgunder in a proper Pinot Noir glass. So Germany's got a third of the world's Pinot Noir. Most of it is drunk there, which is why we see so little outside. But for them, it's really important. As a nation, they really like red wines. They import a lot of red wines because the climate means they can't always make the more full-bodied styles that they also enjoy. So they tend to import from Spain for that. But they make Pinot Noir and they make a lot of it. And the great thing is they make it in a really good spread of quality and price points. So it's possibly some of the most affordable and enjoyable Pinot Noir on the planet, certainly if you consider what comes out of Burgundy these days. But here, it's got its natural acidity. It's the cool climate of Germany overall is great for ripening it. Doesn't have too much tannin. It tends to produce light to medium bodied wines. Doesn't tend to have too much alcohol. The thorn in the side of the winemakers is it's really difficult to manage in the vineyard. It tends to rot really easily. So you have to persevere. There's one famous example from Southern Australia called the Cruel Mistress, which kind of sums its temperament up as a grape, pardon. So we come to the Pfalz and to Messmer. So I'm just going to pause for a few seconds and just have a sip of this lovely Spatburgunder. It's lovely. It's so silky, really fresh, a little bit of spiciness there. Very, very easy to drink. Very good value, I think. The Pfalz is a big region in Germany. If any of you have ever visited Alsace, if you simply headed north out of Alsace and kept going, you'd just come into the Pfalz. Geographically, historically, physically, it's very, very similar. It doesn't have it's not a region that is bisected by a river, and yet it is sandwiched between the foothills of the Vosges to the west and the plain of the Rhine to the east. It's the hottest, sunniest part of Germany, And the best part of the vineyards are between the southern half of it, between Diedesheim and Wachenheim, which is actually where Messmer are based. It also has a wine route, as does Alsace. So it's a 53-mile long Deutsche Weinstrasse. So if you easy to explore. And Riesling rules here. The Pfalz has more Riesling than any other grape, and more in it as a percentage of its region than any other part of the world. Pinot Noir is also really important, and so is Spatburgunder. So this is the last member of the Pinot family, Pinot Blanc. I love this picture of Diedesheim, excuse me, just because, well, you almost don't know actually you're in Germany here, because it just looks like an extension of Alsace. This gorgeous architecture, the flowers everywhere, the fantastic elaborate signs for everything, restaurants, Weinstubes. So a Weinstube, if you don't know, if you've not been in this neck of the world, a Weinstube is a place where you can go and drink lots of wines by the glass, with lovely kind of local, simple food. And these are some Pfalz vineyards, Riesling, if they're orange in the autumn. And you can see they sort of slope up to the foothills of the Vosges. And it's a really pretty region, gentle rolling hills down towards the Rhine Valley. Very, very similar to Alsace. This is Burweiler, which is the village where Messmer are based, and it has a lovely little chapel on the top of the hill up there. It's very, very picturesque. And here's the wine that we're tasting. So the winery was founded 60 years ago by Herbert and Elizabeth Messmer, and they've got 27 hectares of vines. So they're not yet organic, but they are practicing low intervention farming, which means they're finding ways of managing pests in the vineyard without having to use a pesticide. And they are converting to biodynamics. And they approach even their sort of entry-level wines, which is what this one is, cool, slow fermentation, small batches, mostly in stainless steel, but just a third in 500 or 600 litre barrels. So those are sort of twice the size of a Bordeaux barrique. And generally the bigger barrels will give a much less oaky imprint. It's unfined, so if you're vegan, this is a great wine for you, and very lightly filtered. And let's have a taste. A lovely sort of sweet red cherry and raspberry fruit, a little bit of spiciness, freshness, but just really balanced with a nice level of alcohol, a very kind of pleasing texture. I think it's an extremely well-made wine, and extremely good value as well. So we're just going to come back to the map now. We've looked at the Nahe, we've had a look at the Mosel, the Rheingau, Rheinhessen, and the Pfalz. And you can see here, Pfalz sitting on the left-hand side of the map as we look at it. And we're going to look now, and for the rest of the time, at Baden, Württemberg, and Franken. So these are the regions on the right side of the Rhine as you look at the map. And you can see Baden's a really big one. The area up here mirrors Alsace completely. And this, unsurprisingly, is really the main red wine territory because it's just a bit warmer here. I mentioned that you've got Alsace, and then you've got on the other side of the Rhine River, you've got what effectively is Baden with the Black Forest. And the Rhine is a rift valley. So this is a very simple diagram just to give you the idea of what's happened over years and years of movement and soils being moved up to the top. If you look, I couldn't find one for you, but if you look at a diagram of different soil types closer to the surface on both sides, as you go down the hill, they change. And it's certainly it's the same in Alsace. The Grand Crus tend to sit on patches where a particular soil appears, and at the bottom of the slope there might be a different soil. So it's just like a little sort of mosaic. It'd make a fantastic jigsaw puzzle actually. If you looked at soil map of Alsace, you know that would be one to be doing in lockdown with 1,000 pieces. It would keep you gainfully employed for weeks. But here you've got the Black Forest, and this is volcanic soil. And what you have here is the Kaiserstuhl, which is an extinct volcano, which is famous, really. If you're standing on the Kaiserstuhl, looking across the Rhine, you're 15 minutes from Alsace. It's that close. Well, sorry, 15 miles, probably not 15 minutes, because you've got the river to cross. But Baden is Germany's most southerly region, and it's the long one, all the way from Heidelberg to the Black Forest. And it's a region where there were lots of cooperatives, that there were actually in the Pfalz after World War II. That's quite common in Europe as people try to reinstate viticulture and industry. And the vineyards lie in a long strip, sort of sandwiched between the Black Forest and the Rhine Valley below, and sort of mirroring Alsace. The area around Kaiserstuhl has the highest temperatures in Germany and the densest concentration of volcanic soil. It's Spatburgunder central, it really is. So, and here we have Spatburgunder, Grauburgunder, Weißburgunder, Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, and Pinot Blanc. And then there's the area that is just south of Baden, the area of Ortenau, which is famous for its Rieslings. So this is Kaiserstuhl. It's really good walking country if you're a walker. And this area of vines is called the Emperor's Chair. You just sit there and just look down. So we're just going to have a quick look at Weißburgunder as the last member of the Pinot family. So this is the easy drinking grape, and you get Pinot Blanc in Champagne, you get it in Alsace, and it's the easy one. It tends not to make particularly age-worthy or serious wines, but it's a wonderful go-to on a daily basis for a delicately fruity, slightly spicy, sort of vaguely textural, not too alcoholic, just lovely, smashable white. It's the everyday wine in Germany as it is in Alsace. And then looking at Württemberg, I'm just going to go back. So here is Württemberg here and Franken. So it's a little bit under the radar. It's really quite productive. It's Germany's fourth largest region, but we don't really know it in the UK. It's warm, so there is really good red here. And Lemberger is the star grape. So you might know Lemberger as Blaufränkisch elsewhere, or Kefrankos in Hungary. Trollinger is the most planted red, and it's a sort of red equivalent to something like Pinot Blanc in that it makes wonderfully juicy, refreshing, smashable red, a bit like sort of young Beaujolais. And Zweigelt also grows here, and so does Riesling. So here's Lemberg. You can see with these lovely dark skin berries. It produces kind of more sort of blackberry, slightly spicy, crunchy fruit. Lemberg in Germany tends to be a little bit lighter. The best maker is Scheibmann, and you'll find that on the shelf in the shop if you fancy trying it. So here are the Württemberg vineyards, very pretty, sort of gently hilly. And this is Trollinger, so bigger berries, not quite so dark. It's known as Schiava in the north of Italy. It produces quite light coloured wines, a bit like Zweigelt, and they have a really kind of spicy edge. So this is a wine that you might want to try slightly chilled. I know we're not quite at the stage where we can eat in gardens and have picnics, but when we are, this is something that ought to be on your radar for those sort of occasions. And in Franken, Franken's the Bavarian region, so it really is sort of beer country, but it's very, very good at wine, and in particular, red wines. And in terms of whites, it grows Riesling really well, but it's one region where Silvana does incredibly well. And Silvana is a grape that is not generally regarded as capable of great things. Again, it's the same in Alsace. There are 2 villages in Alsace where you can make Grand Cru, and in Franken, there is an exception which allows the equivalent of a Grand Cru to be made from Silvana from the Eschendorfer Lumpen vineyard. This is a traditional bottle shape here. It's called a box bottle. Obviously, this is a really old one. It's 1904, but the shape still is the same today, and it's lovely. It's not the best for stacking on shelves, I have to say, because, of course, it takes up two spaces effectively, but it is distinctive. So this is the point where we should really think about Silvana, because we have wines made from Silvana, from Franken, by wholesaler in the shop from the best vineyard, and they really are exceptional. So if you really want to try Silvana at its best, rather than as a grape that you might have as an aperitif, but perhaps not think of pairing with food, this is where you ought to be doing it. And it's a lovely, lovely region to visit, sort of baroque and pretty. I thought we ought to, too, before we close, look at some German wine labels, because there are now two schools of labelling. We've been looking mostly at this side. So the modern quality levels, which were last updated in 2012, are very similar to Burgundy. That's the closest sort of model I can think of. So you have Gutswein, which is regional. So that would be like Bourgogne Rouge. Ortswein, which is village wine. That might be something like, say, Chambon-Musigny. Erster Lagen, Premier Cru. So Chambon-Musigny, Premier Cru, and Grosse Lagen, Chambon-Musigny, Grand Cru. So that's the comparison, which I hope makes sense to you. The traditional, and these, of course, are mostly dry, not necessarily all dry, but they are mostly dry. The traditional quality designations, the predicats, were based on the level of sweetness in the grapes when picked. So the least ripe was Cabinet, producing light, off-dry to medium dry wines. Spätlese, late picked. Auslese, picked later. Beeren Auslese, late picked berries. Eiswein, picked when frozen in January in the early hours of the morning. And TBA, Trocken, Beeren Auslese. So dried, late picked berries, the equivalent to noble rot. As far as these are concerned, they need not necessarily be sweet. Even though there will be lots of sugar in the grapes when they're picked, they may not be producing very sweet wines. They will have a lot more concentration, obviously, but they won't necessarily be sweet. So how do you know whether it's dry or not? Well, we'll come to that in a tick. I just wanted to explain a bit about this new classification. This is the one based on site and most recently modified in 2012. And it's unusual in that it's not something that the state has determined. It's an alliance of 200 of the best wine growing estates across Germany. Quality is determined by the site and the grape variety. And they aim to assess the quality of the best vineyards in Germany and restore the reputation of Germany's dry wines. So this eagle, this logo on the neck of the bottle is your guarantee that farming is ecologically responsible and that the wine has been made in a traditional way. Top quality dry wines within VDP are labelled VDP Grosse Gewachs, and the sweeter wines will be VDP Grosse Lagen plus Cabinet or Auslese or Spätlese, but many of them are dry. So dry is trocken, totally trocken. And around 65% of all German wine is dry these days, red and white. Trocken has a particular definition. You can have up to 9 grams of residual sugar per litre of wine, provided there's enough acidity to keep it dry and to keep it, to keep it feeling dry. So if you think that 9 grams seems quite high, bear in mind that if you're buying a bog standard Sauvignon from New Zealand, you might well have 5 or 6 grams of residual sugar in that, and yet you won't notice it. So it's about balancing the ferocious acidity of Riesling with enough sugar for the wine to just express its flavours and feel comfortable when you drink it. And then we have half trocken, medium dry, up to 18 grams. So it's a bit like, I suppose, demi-sec in Champagne. And fine herb, which is a local term. It's a bit more than medium dry, just a little bit sweeter than half trocken. Not seen that often, actually. So why should we be drinking German wines? Well, there are lots of reasons to be cheerful about them. I think they've never been better. They've certainly never been more varied and more good quality. They're more interesting, and they're much, much more likely to be dry than not. And they offer amazing value. Just the range of styles and grape varieties that you don't really find treated the same way anywhere else. Germany does. So drink German wine and clink different. So please, I look forward to hearing your comments in the chat. And if Jenny would like to unmute you, I'll stop sharing a screen and we can catch up. And what was the most surprising thing tonight for you, either in the wine that you drank or what you saw or heard?
I enjoyed the Pinot Noir. I didn't expect it to be so rounded and little spice there, and it just went down really well. So that was a big surprise for me.
So, Jenny, who's speaking? I can't hear.
That's Chris. I'm under Chris.
Oh, hi. Hi. So did you enjoy the Pinot?
I did, and it was really interesting. It's more than I expected. And last night we had a New Zealand Pinot Noir, and there were some similarities there. I think maybe the one we had from New Zealand was a bit more rounded. This was really lovely, very enjoyable. I certainly will try it again.
I think certainly, I mean, if you're buying it at the shop as part of a case, it's I think $14.75 or $16 a bottle. Pinot's a difficult grape to grow, and it's very difficult to make cheaply because of that. It requires a lot of work in the vineyard, and obviously work equals costs. Right. And for me, I think it's just such a beguilingly pretty and refreshing Pinot to drink. Yeah, and very nice. Really outstanding value.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, anybody else got any comments on either of the wines or anything else for that matter?
Pippa, I have a question. Hi, this is.
Hi, how are you?
How are you? Yes, it is in regards to this Grauburgunder. So I still would like to understand better the body. So I sense this wine with a very low acidity, but the level of alcohol, what is it? 13%.
13.5. Yeah,
13%, with a very low acidity, but very fruity. What is the body? And you know, the creamy texture, the oily texture. I don't know. I mean, I try to look if he did some malolactic fermentation or any on, you know, if he left anything on the lees, but it's not cloudy. It's very clean. You smell the minerals. It's delicious. It's delicious. So how would you describe the body?
Well, generally it's interesting because I think with sort of Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, and Grauburgunder, there's kind of a range. And if you have something that is quite, let's say, dilute, commercially produced Pinot Grigio from Italy, then it tends to be quite light and quite inconsequential. You don't really notice much. But when you get Pinot Gris in Germany or in Alsace, and as Pinot Gris or Grauburgunder in Germany, those tend to be, it's warmer, and people tend to make a richer style. So picking a little bit later, obviously there's a little more sugar in grapes, so therefore the alcohol is higher. And you must always remember that alcohol gives a kind of lovely kind of creamy sensation anyway. It's viscous. So Pinot Gris has a tendency to produce quite viscous wines. I mean, certainly I've got a couple of Grand Crus from 2011 from a grower called Bottgeil in Alsace, and they are insanely rich, 14.5%. Very, if you imagine the kind of exotic aspects of this wine and add some, you end up with something that is even richer. So it's a grape which can respond differently to different ways of growing, to different ways of handling in the winery, but it should, for me, have a proper kind of texture to it. That's the joy of it. And I particularly love this example. I agree with you, the acidity's on, it's certainly not more than, say, medium, but the spiciness of the flavors kind of balances that. And the intensity of it, the minerality, just keeps it all.
So how would you assess the body? Would you say medium?
I would say medium plus a bit, actually, for a white wine. It's really quite generous. It feels very nice in the mouth.
Yes, and the potential for aging, none, right? A year, two.
I think it might keep longer. Only because I know his wines and they last really well. He builds them very carefully.
Okay.
And I think it's utterly lovely now, and it's the 18th vintage. So about a year or two more, I don't think it's going to suffer at all.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody else? Thank you.
Thank
Anybody
you.
else got any more comments or questions?
May I ask about, you said you were drinking it from a Pinot Noir glass.
I am, yes.
What is a Pinot Noir glass?
That's a Pinot Noir glass. Can you see?
Yes, thank you. And
Right.
you weren't, the Mosel glasses, you wouldn't drink the white from those,
No, I wouldn't. I know they're very pretty and they're very traditional, and I do remember seeing them in restaurants back in the day. But no, I wouldn't. I think most white wines really are better if they're in that sort of glass. You know, I don't know, a Riesling or a Salso Universal, or just a white wine glass. I mean, these are quite small. These are technically tasting glasses that I have, and they're Spiegelau ones, but they're quite big, and I tend to use them all the time at home because they're a great shape, and also because midweek I don't particularly want to be drinking too much. So a slightly smaller glass in that shape works really well for most things.
Thank you.
If you think about it, if you are sort of going to invest in a really nice wine, it's well worth having some nice glassware at home, because it really does. I think it really does. And the logic behind a Pinot glass, they're all variations on this shape. In other words, they're a bowl with quite a, relative to the width of the bowl, the aperture is narrower. And that's because Pinot is aromatic. And when you swirl the wine in the glass like that, the shape of the glass captures the smells. There's another reason for it too, which has to do with the way that your mouth picks up different parts of different aspects of the wine when you taste it. And with Pinot, it's an acidic grape, and it's aromatic, and it's light in body, and it's not tannic particularly. So when it lands in your mouth from a narrower glass, it tends to hit the front of your tongue. That's where you get all the sweetness first. So you get the sweetness, and then the wine has to make its way towards the back of your mouth, find the sides of your tongue, and then you pick up the sharpness. So if you had a glass that just tilted it straight to the back of your mouth, you get that sort of sharpness and miss the sweetness. So I know it, you know, people tend to think it's a little bit precious, but actually there's some sound sort of physics behind the design of glasses. And if you need convincing, you only need to just try tasting Pinot in a Cabernet glass, or Cabernet in a Pinot glass, which is far, far worse. Right. It does make a difference. Anybody else got more questions? Or?
Yeah.
Hi, hello.
Hi, Pippa. Hi.
Hi, how are you doing? Nice to see you.
Yeah.
How are you guys?
Yeah, we're fine. Thanks. I was wondering about, so the red is slightly fizzy.
Or the Pinot or the Grauburgunder?
The
Pinot.
The Pinot.
The Pinot. Mine isn't. No.
That's the Pinot, right? That's, yeah, the red one.
Yeah.
No, I'm getting confused with the names of the of the grape. Sorry about that, but it's slightly fizzy, and is that because it's the fermentation? There was something with the fermentation, which I've now also.
It shouldn't be.
Yeah. Sorry to say, we had one of those bottles as well. I don't think it's actually as it should be. The other bottle is very different. It's not fizzy. There's something wrong with that one bottle.
Yes. Yeah. It shouldn't be.
It's not fizzy at all. It should be. We just took the other bottle, and that was a very different wine.
Oh, we're going to do that now. We're going to now.
Have we got a different vintage? I wonder.
No, it was. I don't know what was wrong with that one bottle, but it was wrong. It was fizzy. I wouldn't say like Coca-Cola, but it was not as it should.
It's
tiny bit, and sediments, and I don't think it was the. The other bottle was very different. This is how it should taste. I mean, it's a Messmer wine. It should taste very different from a fizzy.
Yes, absolutely.
Thingy.
Okay, well, we're going to try the other one now. See if it's different. Anyway, I thought it had to do with the fermentation.
Well, it shouldn't be fizzy. It should not be re-fermenting, certainly.
Okay, we're going to try this one now.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
And report
All right.
back, yeah.
Is it all right to ask a quick question?
Yes, of course.
So it sounds from what you're describing like a lot of the vineyards and the styles in Germany are really that something happened around 2012 or so thereabout where they really redefined it. Do you think they're really trying to capture more kind of the export markets and they're trying to promote their wines to people outside of Germany?
Well, they do export a lot, and it's a good question because I think, yes, I mean, the most recent the most recent reform of the VDP was in 2012, but it started well before that. And it coincided with a move toward making wines that are drier and better reflect where they're from. So in other words, they're more Burgundian, if you like, in character, and less about reflecting a sweeter or riper or less ripe style, which is what the old predicats basically enshrined. And I think it is a good question too, because in terms of the export markets, the predicat system is really difficult to follow. And there is an understandable reaction that, well, they're sweet, so when would I drink these wines? How do I pair them with food, for example? The VDP wines are really much, much clearer, and they're not all dry, but the vast majority is. And it is, you know, it's certainly true that when you see that little logo on the screw cap or the foil, increasingly the screw cap in Germany, you know that you're dealing with a very, very good quality wine. Yeah, but they do. I mean, it's interesting. I think if I read correctly, Germany's just struck a deal with Japan because you can imagine with Japanese cooking, the sort of the purity and the kind of nervosity of really fine Riesling is just lovely. It's beautiful, very clean.
Thank you.
Good question. Yeah. Anybody else got any more comments?
Yeah, just one question. You touched earlier on the aging potential of the Grauburgunder. Sorry, what about the Spatburgunder? You know, to me, it's not got a heavy tannic structure, but there's something there that I think another couple of years you start to get a little bit of that, you know, earthy soup-bois sort of thing with Pinot Noir. Have you tried it 4 or 5 years down the line at all?
What am I drinking?
I think it's 2018.
Yeah, so we're already, yes, we're sort of 2+ years in, and I think to bear in mind the bottled under screw cap, its evolution will be slightly slower because there won't be much, if any, oxygen getting in there. I don't think it would harm if you kept it, but in a way I can't see the point because it's just so utterly gorgeous now. You know, it's lovely. You know, there are, if you like, better quality, more expensive German Pinot Noirs from different regions, which are really cellarable. And that's where I'd probably want to sort of spend my money and lay them down. But for me, it's it's just a wonderfully well-made, enjoyable, accessibly priced, cracking example of a grape that's notoriously difficult. Certainly in the posh places like Burgundy, you know, you just can't find anything now that gets anywhere near this value, I think. And I like the New Zealand ones, but some of them can just be a little bit, for me, perhaps a little bit too ripe on occasion. Whereas I think this has a nice balance of fine, silky tannin and enough freshness to be enjoyable, enough ripeness to be pleasant without straying into excess.
Okay.
How to get on with the Grauburgunder?
Yeah, no, certainly. I really like that. Yeah, they're two good wines. Yeah.
I know. Yeah. We were tasting. I mean, Richard, who's our buyer, has this lovely expression that you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you get to a princess, and it's never more true than when you're tasting. And we were tasting, I think, quite a high number. There were several different Grauburgunders and a few Pinot Blancs as well, and a few other bits and pieces. And the Grauburgunder just stood out. It really was head and shoulder, but just startlingly good in the range. So it was not an easy decision to just say yes, we'll have that.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the loveliest Pinot Gris we have in the shop. I really do.
Yeah. what I liked, well, also I did a Riesling tasting last week, and I was directly comparing it to that. And yeah, the extra body and the spiciness is, you know, I like compared to even a good Riesling. Yeah, there's an extra depth there, isn't there? Which
yes, there is.
Yeah, nice contrast.
It's a mark of. I mean, he is such a good grower, Hexamer, really.
Yeah.
And he, you know, not so much now because it's quite apparent that the Noir has become a region where there is a very, very high level of winemaking as an average. But certainly when I visited, which would have been, I think it was 14, and it was just that little region, there was this sort of body of 9 growers called the 9 of the Noir, and they were really working hard to promote the idea that the Noir could make very good quality dry wines. And I think they've done it. I think, you know, he was pretty much the sort of capo of the group.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else got any more comments they'd like to make or questions they want to ask?
Hi, Pippa.
Oh, hello.
Hi,
how are you?
This is Derek. So
yes, I can see.
So it's a bit of a follow-up question from the question you've just been asked already. It's about vintages with these wines and whether that is a guide to drinking them, whether there are spectacular vintages or whether it's produced to a standard rather than a year.
In terms of the Pinot, this is their entry level.
Yeah,
and I think it's made to be what it is, a well-made, accessible, enjoyable Pinot at a modest price. I think you know they make Messmer make quite a lot of wine. So if you look further up the pecking order, then obviously you'll find things that are specific to certain sites and obviously intended for some aging. And certainly with Hexamer, his Rieslings are really good. Yeah. But it's good that there is, you know, it's very difficult when you have a country where quality starts at about 30 quid. It's just really hard. And the great thing about Germany now is that there are some really interesting things that people can enjoy at much more accessible prices. You don't have to be a connoisseur of top-notch Riesling to enjoy German wine anymore. And I think that's really important because getting people just aware that there are well-priced, really nicely made wines from different grape varieties that also happen to be in German. You know, then you can sort of encourage people to try Riesling, to try dry Riesling. And I actually found a Messmer at a tasting a couple of years ago in one of our bigger suppliers, and I just thought this is just lovely. And they also do a lovely they do a Grauburgunder or Mosel, which is it's more kind of, it's closer to something from Alto Adige perhaps than Hexamer's wine. But I remember coming back and just saying, look, these would be really good because if we have them on the shelf, we can get people to buy German. And they don't have to buy Riesling. And it's worked because we actually sell much more German wine now. You know, there'll always be people who come in and want to buy wonderful Rieslings. They know exactly what they're buying and that's what they're there for. But for, if you like, for people coming to Germany for the first time, it's really important to have things that are really good examples of well-made wines at a sensible price. And I think it does it really well.
Yeah, it sounds like you should lead a trip, I think, to...
No, if anybody needs a trip to Germany, it has to be Richard. He is just, you know, he's Mr. Riesling. He doesn't have bloody as Riesling.
Well, I look forward to the good wine shop trip then.
No, it has to
German wines.
No, it definitely, he knows it so well. He really does.
Well, great evening. Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's really nice that you were able to join in. See you soon. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.